This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Parshas Pinchas. This evening we're going to learn about the topic of a head covering, a Jewish head covering, a yamaka. And you may be curious, what does yamaka have to do with Parshas Pinchas? It's actually quite simple. The Parsha tells us Pinchas came along, he didn't like what another Jew was doing, he took his sword and he killed him. You think he would kill another Jew without wearing a yamaka? Of course he was wearing a yamaka. That's the source that Pinchas was wearing a yamaka. Now, but all kidding aside, the Zohar HaKadosh tells us, Parshas Pinchas, this week's Parsha, you have on your sheets in number 1 on the 3rd line, Asur l'Talmud Chacham l'mehach dalet amos b'giloi harosh. It is prohibited for a Talmud Chacham to walk 4 cubits with his head uncovered. Mishum, what's the reason? Maloi kol haaretz kavaydai. Because God is everywhere. God's presence fills the whole world. Hashem is here. Hashem is there. Uncle Moshe says Hashem is truly everywhere. Right? Maloi kol haaretz kavaydai. And therefore, says the Zohar, a Talmud Chacham may not walk 4 cubits, approximately 8 feet, without a head covering. So if I were to ask you, what about an ordinary person? What about a regular Jew? Does a regular Jew have to wear a yamaka according to the Zohar? No. The Zohar only says a Talmud Chacham may not walk 4 cubits without a yamaka. A regular Jew, who's not a Talmud Chacham, according to this passage of the Zohar, perhaps would not have to wear a yamaka. There's another Zohar in Parshas Balak. The Zohar tells us about the pasuk Shlomo HaMelech says, Chacham einav b'roshei. A wise man has eyes in his head. So Zohar asks, where else does he have eyes? What do you mean? Why does it have to say a Chacham einav b'roshei? Right? It's a famous expression. Chacham einav b'roshei. Of course he has eyes in his head. Where else would someone have eyes? And the fool, where are the eyes of a fool? Right? Don't answer that question. But the Zohar is asking, Chacham einav b'roshei. Where else does he have eyes? The Zohar tells us a very important principle. Says the Zohar, there is a candle, there is a flame that rests upon the head of every Jew. That flame is the Shechina, Ner Elokim Nishmas Adam, on the head. On top of the mind of every Jew rests a flame, that is the presence of Hashem. The Jew is the wick. He's the psila, he's the wick. So we're the wick, God's the flame, now we're only missing one ingredient. Shlomo HaMelech tells us, Shemen al roshcha al yachsar, don't forget about the oil. What's the oil? Not in what you're eating. What's the oil? V'shemen al roshcha al yachsar, masim tovim. God is upon your head. You are the wick. Mitzvahs are the oil. Mitzvahs are the oil. Says the Zohar, that is the reason why a chacham has to wear a yamaka. If you look on the 3rd line, Lo yahach barnash begilo dereisha dalet amos. A person should not walk 4 cubits without a yamaka. Why? Because the Shechina rests upon the head of a person. By the way, based on the Zohar, there's a very interesting sefer called Livyas Chaim from the grandson of the Bach. The Bach says an amazing thing. The grandson of the Bach says, why does a person only become a chuyev in mitzvos at the age of 13? Why not 10? Why not 5? Why not 20? Says the sefer Livyas Chaim, why do we do mitzvahs? To fuel the Shechina. The Shechina that rests on our head. Says the Livyas Chaim, we have a concept that the Shechina never goes lamata me'asara. The Shechina never goes below 10 tfachim. So when a person is born, they're approximately 1 amma tall. Approximately 5 tfachim tall. 2 feet. They become bar mitzvah, they're 2 amos, they're 4 feet. They reach 20, approximately 6 feet. 3 amos. So at what age does your head reach 10 tfachim? So now that God's presence could rest on your head. Well, God's presence only comes 10 tfachim tall. So for you to reach 10 tfachim, you need to be 2 amos, which is at the age of 13. So when you become 13, what do you need? Shemen. So that is why, says the Livyas Chaim, a person becomes obligated in mitzvahs at the age of 13. But be as it may, the Zohar is recommending that a Jew wear a yamaka. But so far, we haven't seen that it's obligatory to wear a yamaka. It's just a good custom, especially for a Talmud Chacham. But as we know, we don't necessarily follow the Zohar when it comes to matters of halacha. So what does the Gemara tell us about the inyan of wearing a yamaka? So the Gemara says in Masechta Kedushin Daf Lamed Aleph, number 3, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Asur la Adam sheyahalech arba amos b'koima zekufa. It is prohibited for a person to walk 4 cubits with an erect posture. You know, sometimes you have a guy who walks in, his chest is bulging out. He looks like he owns the world, right? You know, he said, "Don't mess with me." You know, you look at him, you don't even, you're afraid to even look at the guy. The guy might step on you or something. The Gemara says a person may not walk 4 cubits in this arrogant manner. Why? Shenemar maloi kol haaretz kavayda. Because God's presence fills the whole world. Like Hashem says, it's either me or you. If you're going to walk around like you own the world, so then you're shooing me away. It's my world, Hashem says. So a person is not allowed to walk around in this arrogant manner. The Gemara continues. Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, Laimaski arba amos begilei haraish. His personal practice was he did not walk 4 cubits with his head uncovered. Omar, he said, Shechina lamala meiroshi, God's divine presence is above my head. Rabbi, if I were to ask you, is this Gemara saying you're obligated to wear a yarmulka? Or is this Gemara saying it's a nice thing to wear a yarmulka? What would you say?
Nice.
It's a nice thing. The Gemara doesn't say Rav Huna said it's usur to walk without a yarmulka. The Gemara just says Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua, personally did not go 4 amos without a yarmulka. Good for him. That's wonderful. I'm very happy he did that. But that's not mandatory. The Gemara is not saying every Jew is required to wear a yarmulka. The Gemara is just saying Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua, he personally did not walk 4 cubits without a yarmulka. Or the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Chesam Beis, also with the same individual, Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua. Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua, he got up and he said, I want everyone to know that there is something that I excel in. I am pious in a certain way. I have an extra righteous behavior that most people don't do. And you know what it is? Teisi li, please give me my reward. Because I would never walk 4 cubits with my head uncovered. And the Rishonim point out that if Rabbi Huna, brother of Yeshua, is saying, give me reward, nobody would ever say, give me reward, I don't eat treif. Give me reward, I don't speak Lashon Hara. These aren't required. This is required behavior. Nobody would draw attention to that practice if it's something which is required. The fact that Rav Huna brother of Yeshua said, Teisili, give me extra reward, that implies that he was doing something out of the ordinary, something really special. And what did he do? He didn't walk 4 cubits without a yarmulka. So again, the Gemara seems to be saying, wearing a yarmulka is not obligatory, it's merely a nice thing to do. Or another Gemara in Shabbos. Look at number 5. The Ime de Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. The mother of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amrila Kaldai, the stargazers told her, Baruch Ganavahava, your kid is going to be a robber. So what did she do? Lo shavikte galuye reshe. She would not allow him to run around with his head uncovered. Why? Amrale, she would say to him, Kasi reshech, cover your head, Kehechi de tahavi alach emsa deshmaya, so that you'll have the fear of God. See here, one day, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, she was walking in East New York, and she passes by one of these astrology shops, and the lady calls her in, and she has the crystal ball, and she says, I want you to know that your son is going to be a ganav. So she doesn't know what to do. So she goes to the Svarim store. She says, give me your biggest yarmulka. She plucks it on his head. She says, kid, wear this so you have some fear of God. Now the Gemara implies that if this lady would have told her, I want you to know your son is going to write a Perush on the Shiltus, right? Let's say she would have got in the news that your son is going to finish Shas by the time he's 2.5. She wouldn't have put the yarmulka on the kid. It's only because she got word that he was going to be a Rasha. So again, the Gemara seems to imply that a yarmulka is a nice thing to do, but it's not required. Mar Nevuchim, the Rambam in the Mar Nevuchim, the guide for the perplexed. So if you're perplexed, this is for you. Says the Rambam on the 5th line, Ugedoyle hachachamim hayu sayladim igiloi rosham. The great Gedolei Yisrael were very scared to walk around with their heads uncovered. Why? Because the Shechina is hovering over the head of a person. The Rambam is not saying that every Jew is required to wear a yarmulke. The Rambam is reporting to us that Gedolei Yisrael, the big Gedolim, if they're 90 years old with a long white beard, you won't see them walking around without a yarmulke. But a regular person, according to the Rambam, no comment about a yarmulke. Okay, so we have the Zayar, we have these three Gemaras, the Mar Nevuchim. It seems like yarmulke is a nice thing to do, but it's not absolutely required. So what's the halacha? So the Kolbai reports in the name of the Ram. The Ram is Rav Meir, the Marami Rothenberg. The Marami Rothenberg writes in number 7, writes the Kolbai, because of Haram Nishmas Hayeden, She'enoi Asur Leilech Begilei Harosh. There is no Isser to walk around. How do you say in Yiddish with a Gloizen cup? A Gloizen cup. There's no Isser. And the Ram says that's Pshat in the Gemara. Teisi li Dulei Sagina Daran Sagilei Rosh. That's why the Maram were saying, we're doing something extra righteous. We wear a yarmulke. So what does the Beis Yosef have to say about this? If you want to know what to do, halach lamaisa. So we turn to Maran Bet Yosef. The Beis Yosef writes, number 9, in Archaim Siman Tzadi Aleph, he quotes the Kolbai in the name of Maram Rothenberg that a yarmulke is optional. It's a nice thing to do. You're not required to wear it. You're not required to wear it. It's not usher to walk around without a yarmulke, says the Beis Yosef in Archaim Siman Tzadi Aleph. Rabbi said, now, once you've heard this, you can't leave. Okay, now we lock the doors. So far, according to the Zayar, according to the Gemara, according to the Beis Yosef, yarmulke is a nice thing. However, there's another Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef in Siman Memvav. Every morning we make something called Birchas HaShachar. You open up, the Gemara tells us, in the olden days they used to open up their eyes and they would make the bracha, Poikei Achiver. They would put on their clothing, they made the bracha, Malbish Arumen. They would stretch, they made the bracha, Matir Asu. They would stand, they put their feet on the ground, Roika Ha'aretz Alamayim. The Gemara says they put on their shoes, Sha'asa li kol tzarki. Says the Torah, and when you put on your hat, you make the bracha, Oiter Yisrael b'Sefara. God crowns the Jews with glory. And what the Beis Yosef wants to know is, why do we mention Yisrael? Do we say Poikeach Ivrei Yisrael? That God gives sight to the Jews? Do we say Malbish Arume Yisrael? Do we say Sha'asa li Yisrael called Sarkam? Why when it comes to a hat, do we specifically mention Klal Yisrael? Says Maran Bet Yosef. Says Rabbi Yosef Kara. Look in the last narrow line. V'nir li. It would seem to me, Shetam brachazu. The reason you make a bracha when you cover your head, Lefisha asur lahalech begiloi haraish. Because it is prohibited to walk with your head uncovered. So the Maran Bet Yosef, after all that we said before, he completely does an about face and he says it is prohibited to walk with your head uncovered. And even those who say it's only a nice thing to do and it's not usher, everyone would agree it's a nice thing to do. So since everyone would agree it's a nice thing to do, so either we're required to wear a yarmulke, or it's a nice thing, but either way it's only something a Jew has to wear, right? Goyim don't have to wear yarmulkes. Why they make the guy put on a yarmulke when they come to a holy spot? Who knows? Well, what's the inyan of the guy wearing the yarmulke? It used to be, in the times of the Shvus Yaakov, when the guy came to the shul, the Jews had to take off their yarmulkes. Now, when the guy comes to the shul, you make the guy put on the yarmulke.
Or about the Pope? He wears a yarmulke.
One thing I will not be able to answer tonight are any of the customs of the Pope. Can't explain it. Right? So, the Beis Yosef, look, again, Rabbi say, since the Beis Yosef says, the reason why we make the bracha of Oiter Yisrael b'Sefara is because it is usher to walk Dalet Amos without a yarmulke. And even those who say it's a good practice, it's still a good practice, and therefore it's something Jews do, So since it's something Jews do, we say Oiter Yisrael b'Sefara. But if we were to ask, this Beis Yosef that we just read, does he hold Yarmulka's obligation, or does he hold it's or he holds only a nice thing to do? He seems to say it's mandatory. He seems to say it's usher to go without a yarmulka. So we have what we call ourselves a stira in the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef in Siman Tzadi Aleph quotes the Marami Rothenberg, who writes, a yarmulka is just a nice thing to do. According to the Marami Rothenberg, a yarmulka is like playing dreidel. It's a nice thing to play dreidel on Hanukkah, and if you forgot to, no big deal, no sweat. A yarmulka is like, extra religious behavior. You want to say the Sheish Zechiris after davening? Go ahead, say it. You want to wear a yarmulka? Gesundheit. But the Beis Yosef is saying in Siman Mem Vav, it is asur to walk without a yarmulka. So what do we do? What do we do when we have a contradiction in the Beis Yosef? Very good. That's what we have the Shulchan Aruch for. Because the Beis Yosef is merely a commentary on the Torah. But the Beis Yosef codifies his final halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. So let's take a look at number 12. Says the Beis Yosef in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Beis, Asur leilech b'kaima zekufa. It is prohibited to walk with an erect posture. One should not walk 4 cubits bareheaded. So what would you say the Shulchan Aruch holds? Is yamaka an obligation, or is yamaka a nice thing to do?
Obligation.
The Shulchan Aruch is clearly saying a yamaka is a nice thing to do. What? How do you see that? Says the Chida, very simple. You have to know how to read. First, the Shulchan Aruch says, Asur leilich b'kaima zekufa. You're not allowed to walk with an erect posture. And then he says, and don't walk 4 amos b'gilei harosh. He doesn't say, Asur leilich ta'ar amos b'gilei harosh. Why would he say when it comes to walking b'kaima zekufa, Asur, and when it comes to wearing a yarmulka, don't do it? Apparently, there's a big difference between walking with an erect posture and walking with your head uncovered. Walking with an erect posture is absolutely forbidden. But walking with your head uncovered, says the Chida, the Shulchan Aruch is telling us, is just a nice thing to do. Right? It's a beautiful diuk. Because the Shulchan Aruch says, he doesn't say, Asur leilich b'kaima zekufa ve'asur b'gilei harosh. He doesn't say, Asur leilich b'kaima zekufa u'v'gilei harosh. He says, Asur leilich b'kaima zekufa kama ve'lo yelich b'gilei harosh. Where did the Beis Yosef get it from? This is word for word the Gemara. The Gemara says, Asur leilich b'kaima zekufa. And Rav Huna, Brei Rabbi Shua, personally, he wouldn't go b'gilei harosh. Let's take it a step further. So Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, at this point in the Shiur, do you have to wear a yarmulka? No. Okay, and we're not here tonight to tell anybody extra religious behavior. We want to know the letter of the law. According at 8:57, with the doors locked still, is a person obligated to wear a yarmulka? No. Comes the Marshal, Shal Sachuas Marshal, and the Marshal was asked the following question. There's a guy, he gets a headache when he eats. I think I know what he's eating, but he gets a headache when he eats. And he says his yarmulka is really causing him a lot of distress. He wants to take off the yarmulka when he eats. Says the Marshal, by the way, Marshal is one of the greatest of the Achronim. Says the Marshal, I don't see a problem if you want to take off your yarmulka when you eat. Where in Shas does it say you have to wear a yarmulka? You know what the answer is? Nowhere. What about when you daven and when you say Shema? So there are a lot of poskim, says the Marshal, who say you have to wear a yarmulka when you say Shema. And it's not my practice to argue with Rishonim, says the Marshal. But I would say even when you say Shema, you don't have to wear a yarmulka. And I'll bring you a raya from a medrash. The medrash says like this. Normally, when a king comes to the country, so hear ye, he delivers the royal edict, and then somebody reads the edict of the king. What does everybody do when the edict of the king is read? 2 things, says the Medrash. The first thing they do is they stand up. You have to stand up when the king's edict is read. And the second thing they do is they take off their hats. And if you don't take off your hat, it's a capital offense, right? Right? It's a capital offense. It's k'meh. It's like going to a baseball game and not taking off your hat for the national anthem, right? So when a king would come to the city, everyone would stand when his edict is written, and everyone would remove their hats. Says Rebbeinu Shalom, I have an edict. You know what my edict is? Shema Yisrael. But I don't bust your chops. I don't make you stand when you say Shema. You could sit. You could sit. And I don't make you take off your hat. You could leave your hat on. Says the Marshal, think about what Hashem is saying. Hashem is telling the Yid, sit, don't stand when you say Shema. And no, keep the yamaka on. You don't have to take it off. That is clearly mashma. If you want to take off your yamaka, you're allowed to take off your yamaka when you say Shema. Says the Marshal, that's also mashma. It's better to say Shema without a yamaka than to say Shema with the yamaka. Keep the doors locked. It's better, says the Marshal, to say Shema without a yamaka, with your hair bareheaded, than to say Shema with the yamaka. But what am I going to do? I'm going to start up with all the Rishonim, so keep the yamaka on by davening. Oh, they're going to chase me out of town. But if you ask me my opinion, you don't need a yamaka. Not when you daven, not when you learn, and certainly not when you walk on the street. Says the Marshal, you want to wear a yamaka? No problem. You know who should cover their head? Women. Women have to cover their heads. Women have to cover their heads midairaisa. They have to make sure all their hair is covered, biblically. Like the Gemara tells us. A woman doesn't cover her hair, she's violating Das Yehudis. But men don't have to cover their hair. Women have to cover their hair. A woman wants to wear a yarmulka, no problem. Just make sure it covers all the hair. But for a man doesn't have to wear a yarmulka. And says the Marshal, I don't get it. What's more severe, walking around like you own the world, or not wearing a yarmulke? The Gemara says, walking around like you own the world, that's mamish aser. Wearing a yarmulke is only a good practice. So why is it nowadays everyone walks around like they own the world? That nobody cares about. But the yarmulke, all of a sudden, if you don't wear a yarmulke, you're not a frum Jew. It's not true. You could wear says the Marshal, look how backward it is. You have people, they go to hotels, and they don't make sure that their food is not being cooked by a guy. They don't make sure that their wine is not being picked up by a guy. But they wear a yarmulke so everyone thinks they're from. And a guy who eats kosher food and he walks around without a yarmulke, everyone thinks they're a guy. It's just the opposite. The guy who just eats anywhere, he's a bum. But the guy who doesn't wear a yarmulke, he's not doing anything wrong. It doesn't say anywhere in Shas Bavli that you're required to wear a yarmulke. In fact, says the Marshal, I know about one of the Gedolei Hadar who learns Torah all day long without a yarmulke. One of the greatest of all the Achronim sat in his Beis Medrash 24 hours a day with no yarmulke. Now, says Marshal, that's not a good idea. If you're the Gadol Hadar, and everyone's going to be looking at you, and you're going to be there with, a Ketzois HaChoshen and Rabbi Akiva Eger, without a yarmulke, people are going to think, you're a kal. People are going to think you're not worthy of your position. So therefore, says Marshal, I recommend that the Gedolei Hadar wear yarmulkes. And don't think no one's looking, even when the shutters are closed. Rabbis, everyone's spying on you. That's what he says. People are looking through the keyhole. People are looking under the door. People have, cameras hidden everywhere. So even if you think no one's looking at the rabbis have to wear yarmulkes. But someone who is not a Gadol Hadar, what does he need a yarmulke for? Let him first not talk by davening, and then he'll worry about wearing a yarmulke, right? We had to get that in. But, fine. However, says the Marshal, you can't make a bracha without a yarmulke. Okay? Kriya Shema, yes. Torah, yes. But the name of Hashem, nah. You need a yarmulke for that. So what if you're sleeping in bed and you wake up? It's 3:50 and tomorrow is Shavas B'Tammuz, and you want to get a final drink before the Tainus, and you don't have your yarmulke nearby. Says the Marshal, take your hand, keep the doors locked, put it on your head, and make a bracha. I heard some poskim don't like this eitzah. Nah, that they don't like, that if you're in the mikvah and you need to separate between your heart and your erva, to put your hand over your heart, that you can't do. But your hand on your head, no problem. So halacha l'maisa, the conclusion of the Marshal is that yamaka business is a scam. Yamakas are for gedolei hadar, for big tzaddikim. But for regular people, you don't have to wear yamaka. You want to wear yamaka, you're wonderful, great. Good, buy a yamaka, no problem. But you're not required. So Rabbi say, at this point in the shiur, a yamaka is not required. Comes along the Taz. You ready for this? Comes the Taz. Says the Taz, this is all fine and dandy in the olden days. But nowadays, we have goyim. And goyim have a certain practice. And their practice is that when they are outside in the street, they cover their heads. And as soon as they get inside, for some odd reason, the first thing they do is they uncover their heads. They're outside, they come, they sit down to eat, they uncover their heads. They do anything important, they uncover their heads. Why they do that? We don't know exactly why. We don't really care why. But if goyim make it their business to uncover their heads when they're doing something important, we are not allowed to emulate the ways of the goyim. It's called you may not do anything goyim do. Now you'll say, well, goyim breathe, right? Goyim wear hoizen. No. If they do something for a reason, so you're allowed to do it. But if they do something just for no reason, just like it's a mitzvah, you're not allowed to emulate that. So since goyim take it very seriously, that taking off their hat is a sign of respect, nowadays, for a Jew to walk without a yamaka, it's not a good practice to wear a yamaka. It's not a halacha to wear a yamaka. If someone doesn't wear a yamaka, they're violating an Isser D'Oraisa. It's like eating pork. That is the Taz. That is what the Taz says. That nowadays, because goyim do not wear yarmulkas, and they specifically take it off when they want to show respect. They sing the national anthem, they take off their hat. They pledge allegiance, they take off their hat. They go into a courtroom, they take off their hat. They go into the Senate, they take off their hat. Anytime they do something of honor, they remove their hat. They want to show honor, they tip their hat. So to a guy, the removal of the hat is a sign of kavod. Nowadays, says the Taz, from the 1600s and on, yamaka is d'oraisa, it's biblical. The same way you can't have an Xmas tree, and the same way you can't put the wreath on your door in December, you can't walk around bareheaded. That's the opinion of the Taz. So now, what do? You have the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says yamaka is optional. The Taz says yamaka is d'oraisa. Who do you go like? The Marshal B'chlal is making away with the yamaka. According to the Marshal says yamakas are only for the Gedolei Hadar. So what do? The Taz says you have to wear it. Other poskim, the majority of poskim say it's optional. Says Moshe Feinstein, but it's a matter of d'oraisa. It's a question of d'oraisa. It's a question of a biblical prohibition. We are choshesh for the Taz. We are worried about the opinion of the Taz, and therefore a Jew has to cover their head in accordance with this concern of the Taz, that not wearing a yarmulka is a violation of v'chukaseim lo yiselechu. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, I'll take it further. The Marshal and the Shulchan Aruch. You'll ask, well, if it's so important for a Jew to cover their head because goyim uncover their head, why didn't the Shulchan Aruch say you have to wear a yarmulka? Well, you have to know where the Shulchan Aruch was living. Shulchan Aruch wasn't written in the Christian world. Shulchan Aruch was written in the Muslim world. The Muslims are not careful to cover or uncover their head. You'll never see an Arab who will uncover their head as a sign of respect. So in the world the Shulchan Aruch was living in, there was no specific inyan to make sure your head is covered, unless you're saying the name of Hashem. But nowadays, where Jews are living in the Western world, in countries affected by European society, in America, where goyim, till today, Don't think this is an ancient practice. Today in America, 2013, Goyim consider it a sign of honor to take off their hat. By the way, I'll tell you something very interesting. There's a Chuvas Harambam. Chuvas Harambam says there are three main types of Avodah Zarah. Number one, Baal Pa'ar. Baal Pa'ar, they would uncover themselves and they would defecate in front of the Avodah Zarah. That's the first type of Avodah Zarah. Then there's something called Markulas. Markulas, they would take rocks, they would stone the Avodah Zarah. And the third type of Avodah Zarah is Kemoish. Not Moish, right? Kemoish. Oy l'cha Moav avadita am Kemoish. Kemoish was the name of the Avodah Zarah of Moav. Says the Rambam, how did the Moabites serve Kemoish? The way to serve the Avodah Zarah was to uncover their head. So now we see that what Americans do in 2013 has its roots in pagan practice. So you could ask any citizen of the country, why are you taking off your hat? They don't know why. But the roots of it are, that is a form of idolatry. It's a form of idolatry. It's an ancient pagan rite. So therefore, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, what the Taz is saying is very compelling. For Goyim, it is a sign of respect to take off your hat, to take off your yamaka. So a Jew, therefore, is biblically commanded to make sure their head is covered. So now what we have ourselves is, the Taz says, yamaka is d'oraisa. Other poskim say yamaka is optional. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein further. Even the Marshal, who said yamakas are only for Gedolei Hadar, that was 400 years ago. That was 400 years ago. But nowadays, let me ask you a question. Is a person obligated to wear tzitzis? No. Doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you have to make sure you wear a four-cornered garment to put tzitzis on it. The Torah just says, if you happen to have a four-cornered garment on, you have to put strings on it. So, is a Jew allowed to walk in the streets without wearing tzitzis?
Yes.
Technically, yes. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein in a tshuva, not anymore. Do observant Jews wear tzitzis?
Yes.
Yeah. So therefore, if observant Jews wear tzitzis, you can't deviate from what observant Jews do. It's minhag Yisrael. Shema b'ni musar avicha be'altitosh tarsimecha. A Jew can't walk around without tzitzis. Every single day, a Jew has to make sure that he's wearing a four-cornered garment that has strings. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says midoraisa. You don't want to wear wool? You could wear cotton, and you could be yotzei midoraisa. Wool is only a nice hiddur. Wear cotton, they're very lightweight, no problem. But a person can't say, well, it doesn't say it in the Chumash. You're right, it doesn't say in the Chumash. But we have other obligations beyond what it says in the Chumash. Any practice that is widely kept, not by Jews, by Torah observant Jews, by Shomer Torah mitzvahs, becomes mandatory. Good practices that observant Jews keep, everyone has to keep, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. So therefore, says Rav Moshe, when the Marshal said yarmulka was optional, that's when not every Jew used to wear a yarmulka. But nowadays, that observant Jews wear a yarmulka. Even the Marshal, who said only the Gadol Hadar has to wear a yarmulka, he would agree that today, every simple Jew is required to wear a yarmulka. So you have according to the lenient poskim, yarmulka is an obligation because it's a custom that all Jews keep. According to the Taz, it's biblical. So let's talk about the following issue then. The governor sends us a letter. He's coming to the shul. And when he walks in, he ain't wearing a yarmulka, and we better make sure we're not wearing yarmulke. What do? So after everything we learned, the Marshal is saying, right, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, that nowadays, even according to the lenient opinion, it's a required minhag, and according to the Taz, it's biblical. So imagine if the governor came in, and the governor said, eat treif. Would you eat treif because the governor came in? Of course not. So how could you remove the yarmulke? Yarmulke is a violation of v'chukaseim lo seilechu. Says the Shas Tshuva Shvus Yaakov, if the governor comes in and he says, take off your yarmulke, you take off the yarmulke. Why? But it's a lav in the Torah. It's a lav in the Torah. The lav of uvechukaseim lo seilechu is the one lav which is suspended in order to make peace with the Malchus. Because the Gemara even says there's a certain type of haircut that one may not have. It's called Goydel Kaimi. To have a certain kind of haircut was prohibited, but those who worked with the government, they were allowed to have this kind of haircut. But what do you mean? It's a violation of No. To make peace with the government, this prohibition becomes permitted. So if the governor says, I'm coming into Torah Emes in 10 days, and when I come in, everyone take off the yamaka, says the Shvus Yaakov, take off the yamaka. Especially because this practice that Goyim have to take off their yamaka, the practice is, as they're entering the shul, they take off the yamaka. So if you're going to walk into the shul wearing the yamaka, and you're not going to be mimicking the Goyim, and you're going to take it off later, that's not really called emulating the Goyim. What the Goyim do is they take off the yamaka when they enter the shul. But if you keep it on when you enter, and you just take it off a little bit later, that's not really considered mimicking the Goyim. Okay? So here's the big question. Person gets a phone call, they're looking for a job for a few months, and the headhunter says, I have a great interview for you, but do me a favor, you better not wear the yarmulke. If this guy sees you wearing a yarmulke, he'll never take any of my customers again, and you're not going to get the job. So you go to the interview without the yarmulke, and don't worry, once you get the job, everyone in that firm, everyone in that company wears a yarmulke. Just go to the interview without a yarmulke. So what's the halacha? Well, we would say, Rav Moshe says we paskin like the Taz. The Taz says that wearing a yarmulke is required biblically. And even according to the other opinions, it's a mandatory custom. So what do? Says Rav Moshe, according to the lenient opinions, that's a mandatory custom. It's not more mandatory than a mitzvah d'oraisa. How much money does a person have to give up to fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa? If a person, let's say, made $100,000 a year, and he goes to buy a lulav and esrog, and the merchant says, this year a lulav and esrog is going to cost you $25,000. Do you have to buy a lulav and esrog for $25,000? No. You don't have to give up more than a fifth of your money to fulfill a mitzvah. So according to the opinion that it's mandatory custom, it's not more mandatory than a tefillin. So if you don't have to give up more than a fifth of your money for tefillin, you don't have to give up a job. Rav Moshe says a job is worth more than a fifth of your money. You could go to the interview according to that opinion without the yarmulke. But what about according to the Taz? The Taz says it's an Isser d'oraisa to walk 4 cubits without a yarmulke, and we hold like the Taz. Says Rav Moshe, even though we hold like the Taz, but if it's an oppressing situation where you need the job, you could be lenient, and you could rely on the other opinions, that under these circumstances, you don't have to wear the yarmulke for the interview. But the Taz says it's an Isser d'oraisa. Says Rav Moshe, even the Taz, even though what he says still applies today, there is a loophole, and that is, nowadays, are Goyim so careful to take off their hats when they go inside, and when they sit down to eat? They're not really that careful. You know how we know they're not careful? Because they never wear a hat. Which Goyim walks around in a borsalino with a feather today? Right? You ever see a guy walk around and he say, hat box. I got it in hat box. Right? Do Goyim walk around in hats? Most Goyim don't wear hats. Most Jews don't wear hats. Nobody wears hats anymore. So there are a few Goyim that they'll be careful by the national anthem to take off their hat. But the majority of Goyim, they don't ever wear a hat. And even when they wear it and they come inside, you know why they take it off? Because they're hot. They're not doing it because we're a Goy and that's what Goyim do. They just do it. So therefore, says Rav Moshe, the reasoning of the Taz is not as strong as it once was. So therefore, even though under normal circumstances, you're walking down the street on a regular day, you're biblically obligated to wear the yarmulke. But if it's a matter of an interview and you need the job, under these circumstances, Rav Moshe says, you don't have to wear the yarmulke for the interview. But then someone asks him another question. What if, in my job, I'll never be able to wear the yarmulke? What do you do then? Says Rav Moshe, it's vaday mutter. You don't have to wear the yarmulke. Why? Because even according to the opinion that it's mandatory custom, again, you don't have to lose your job to keep a mandatory custom. What about according to the Taz? Even according to the Taz, we'll be lenient. We'll go like the other opinions if it's a matter of your job. And even the Taz would say that nowadays in America, where Goyim are not so particular about removing their hats to show honor, to show respect, it's permitted to work without a yamaka. Now, you can't make a bracha without a yamaka, and you shouldn't learn without a yamaka. But if your job is dependent on it, you don't have to wear a yamaka. But what if my job's not dependent on it? What if I don't feel comfortable wearing a yarmulka? No one else is wearing a yarmulka, and it makes me uneasy to wear a yarmulka. Too bad. What if people are going to laugh at me? Too bad. What if they're not going to invite me to their parties? Wonderful. What if they're not going to talk to me so much? What if it's going to create a chil Hashem? It's a kiddush Hashem if you wear a yarmulka. There is no leniency because you're uncomfortable. There's no leniency because it makes you hot. There's no leniency because people are going to laugh at you. The only leniency is you got to pay the bills. If you got to pay the bills and it's a matter of your job, it's said according to the Psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein, which many, many people have been relying on in America since this Psak has been issued. If it's a matter of your job, it's not a requirement. What if you take one step out of your office and you're in the elevator? Make sure the yamaka comes on so quickly. Because once you step out of the job, yeah, you're back to an Isser Da'iraisa of walking without a yamaka. But they're going to laugh at me because they're going to see I wear it outside, I don't wear it inside. Laughing is not a heter. That's part of being a Jew. You have to have backbone. You have to stand up for your practices. If the boss says, in my workplace, no one wears a yarmulke, and otherwise you're out of here, so then what could you do? Now, again, nowadays, almost anything goes. You could have people, they come in with bones, stuck through their nose, and nobody says anything. So, you have people with tattoos, you have people with 1,000 piercings through every part of their body. So a yarmulke is, a halbatzar. But nevertheless, if somebody feels that their job is in jeopardy, or their livelihood is in jeopardy, according to the Psak of Rav Moshe, at the workplace, it's not a requirement. What if I'm just walking down the street? Of course you have to wear a yarmulke. Midairaisa, biblically. What if I'm exercising, I'm walking, I'm running? Got to cover your head. What if, right?
What if
a person, what?
Like being murdered.
What? So if in a situation where it's a matter of parnasa, matter of livelihood, the psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein is that one is allowed to be lenient. Rav Moshe takes it to another situation. It's the 3 weeks now. Shaving in the 3 weeks. Shulchan Aruch, the custom among certainly Ashkenazim, is we don't shave during the 3 weeks. Are you allowed to shave? So the person, they're going to laugh at me if I don't shave. Too bad. They're not going to talk to me. I'm going to be uncomfortable. It's itchy. It's hot. Too bad. I'm going to lose my job. Oh, you're going to lose your job? You're allowed to shave during the 3 weeks. That's Rav Moshe's psak. There's a big difference between, in halacha, halacha values what we call hefsid meruba, losing money. If you're going to lose money, especially a livelihood is given great significance in halacha. A livelihood is valued at, if a person thinks by wearing a yarmulke he's not going to have customers, which is highly unlikely. I mean, you go to a B&H in the city, right? They're wearing, all Hasidim. They have plenty of customers, right? I don't think anybody was ever scared away. But if somebody honestly feels they're going to lose their livelihood because they're wearing a yarmulke, okay. But otherwise, if a person's uncomfortable and so forth, a yarmulke is an obligation. Again, we are worried, we are choshesh for the opinion of the Taz. The Taz feels that nowadays, since Goyim, even today, will take off their yarmulke as a sign of respect, not wearing a yarmulke is a violation of Chukaisem Loisei. And even the lenient opinion that says that yarmulke is only customary, it's what we call mandatory custom. It's not optional, it's mandatory. Very interesting. Want to know about yarmulke size? Does it say anywhere how big a yarmulke has to be? Comes Rav Shlomo Kluger, and Rav Shlomo Kluger says a yarmulka has to cover the majority of your head. So if let's say you're 7 1/4 hat size, so you have to make sure your yarmulka is 3.7, 3.71. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, where did he get this from? Where does it say your yarmulka has to cover the majority of your head? Why should it have to cover the majority of your head? Now, if anyone ever asks you, what was the very first tshuva that Rav Moshe Feinstein ever wrote? The very first tshuva Rav Moshe Feinstein ever wrote in Arachayim, Chelek Aleph, Tshuva Aleph, is explaining the opinion of Rav Shlomo Kluger, who says a yarmulka has to cover the majority of your head. Says Rav Shlomo Kluger like this: if you're walking less than Dalet Amos, then you only have to cover a small part of your head. Then you could wear what we used to call in yeshiva a Pepsi Cola yarmulka, right? Then you could have a little yarmulka. But if you're walking Dalet Amos, 4 cubits, then your yarmulka has to cover the majority of your head. So Rav Moshe says, where does this come from? I don't agree with this. The only way I can explain Rav Shlomo Kluger is Rav Shlomo Kluger is going with the Taz. That there are 2 reasons to wear a yarmulka. One reason is you don't want to be like the Goyim. The Goyim go bareheaded. So if you have even a bottle cap on your head, you're already not like the Goyim. But now there's another thing. You want to show the Shekhinah is above your head. So you're going to show the Shekhinah is above your head with a bottle cap? No, you need to have something significant, something that covers the majority of your head. Does a person have to have a yarmulka that covers the majority of their head? Says Rav Moshe, no, I don't agree with this requirement. Rav Moshe says we don't find in any of the Gemaras, in any of the Poskim, that there is a shiur, that there's a minimum amount that a yarmulka has to be. A yarmulka, you know how big it has to be? If someone asks you, is your head covered? Do you have a head covering? If it's so small that somebody can't even tell you're wearing anything, so you don't have a head covering. But if it's something substantial that people see, it doesn't have to be big, small, medium size. As long as it's there, there is no halachic requirement of how big a yarmulka has to be. So let's just summarize halacha l'maisa. Under normal circumstances, let's say what the Mishnah Berurah holds. Under normal circumstances, Mishnah Berurah writes, a person is not allowed to walk 4 cubits without a head covering. What if they're indoors? It doesn't matter even if they're indoors. What if it's less than 4 cubits? It is midas chasidus. It is extra pious behavior not to walk even less than 4 cubits without a yarmulka. So 4 cubits is an absolute requirement. It's according to the Taz, it's d'oraisa. According to the other opinions, it's mandatory custom. Less than 4 cubits is midas chasidus. And even when one goes to sleep, says the Mishnah Berurah, it's a nice thing to do to keep your yarmulka on. It's not required. It's also what we call midas chasidus. It's saintly behavior. It's saintly behavior. However, what if a person feels that by wearing a yarmulka at work, it's going to cost them their livelihood? So say like this. For those people who have already made that decision, and they don't wear a yarmulka in the workplace, certainly yesh lahem al mi lismach. They have what to rely on. Ein moichin biyadam. We cannot say that they're doing anything wrong. Those who do wear a yarmulka at work, so then yashar kaychachem, baruch tiyah, right? So then you're very fortunate. You're doing a wonderful thing. Especially a yarmulka, the Gemara says, elicits, engenders yirah shamayim. In fact, the word yarmulka means yarei malka, to fear the king. It's a special segula to have yirah shamayim, and besides that, it's a good reminder of what your place is among the outside world. If someone is wearing a yarmulka, the other people around you will be less likely to invite you to be part of them, and certainly a very wonderful practice. But in any event, the moment you get out of your workplace, you step into the elevator, you're out of the room, one is absolutely required to wear a yarmulka at all times, when they're walking, when they're sitting, indoors, outdoors. It's a segula for yirah shamayim, and this is the inyan of kisei harosh, which, according to the Marshal, Rav Moshe says, has become mandatory practice, and according to the Taz, is as far as a mitzvah d'oraisa of u'v'chukaseim b'leisei lechu, Boys, have a wonderful evening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.